I'm here with Errin Heyman, Associate Vice President of Learning Experience at National University. Errin, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So I want to just start with a little bit about what you're doing at National University. What are some of the ways that National University has been innovating in the online space in the last few years?
Yeah, well, National University is large. We're one of the largest private schools in the country, nonprofit. We have just hit 250,000 alums worldwide, so we're really proud of that. And National's actually been in the online space for many years. We have some face-to-face courses and hybrid courses, especially if accreditors or regulators need it. We really cater to what we call the Anders. So they're, parents and students. They're military and students. So a lot of what we do is really catering to non-traditional working military. And we look at that and really look at the next generation education and how that really, those techniques, the technologies, policies, and practices that we can bring together to best serve our very particular students, which again, non-traditional, working class, they're helping the military and active duty. So we want to be able to be as flexible as possible. And of course, online allows for a lot of that to happen. So innovating in the space, we've really been able to take who we serve and then wrap all of our experiences around that. So, from the financial aid office to coaching to academic services, and of course, the classes themselves.
Wow. First of all, congratulations on that milestone.
Yeah, it's exciting. Thank you.
That is super exciting. So I know that you have been in the space for a while, as you were just saying. What do you feel like has changed recently? Like, what were you doing maybe 10 years ago that now feels very commonplace that you feel like you're now able to level up a little bit?
Yeah, I think 10 years ago, it was still a little new. I've been in the online space for, almost 30 years, which is amazing and scary to think about. But, 10 years ago, there were still people that were, waiting to get into the space. They didn't necessarily know that this was, commonplace for a lot of schools. And in fact, when the pandemic hit, and having come again from the online space and even worked at an early learning management system, I just assumed that by the time the pandemic hit, that everybody was at least somewhat online, including K-12. And so to hear about all of this, emergency remote learning that came into play and how people are not ready for online actually surprised me quite a bit. So I think 10 years ago gives that hallmark in terms of it was still kind of the Wild West. And there's still a little bit, I think, of the Wild West out there right now too. But part of that is because of AI, and I'll get to that in a minute. But really understanding that, honing in on who your students are, and then being able to cater and using the amazing technology that's out there now is really what's giving us the leg up right now. And, the past couple of years, especially, is the advances in AI, the advances in technology, and the understanding that the classes themselves can be very flexible and still meet outcomes. So while, competency-based education has been around in talk and theory for quite a while, being able to put those theories in practice and look at, it doesn't necessarily matter how students get to a certain outcome, as long as they can demonstrate they're meeting those outcomes, that's really all that should matter. And so that leads me to AI. And of course, I'm sure a lot of people are using AI and generative AI to think through better ways to personalize content, different ways to approach different students, embedding coaching, embedding tutoring, and then maybe even letting students sort of choose their own adventure. So really having the ability to gamify the content, not necessarily in, how it looks and feels like a video game, but how in theory, that agency, that ability for students to choose ways to learn is something that we've really been able to think through and implement in some of our classes.
That is really interesting. I'm excited to talk more about the AI portion and how you're thinking about that. But even before we get there, I know that at National University, you'll focus a lot on neuroconnected design and trying to make sure that you're creating these courses that are, designed well for how the brain actually works. Can you tell me a little bit about what that looks like at National University? How did you implement that? What does that mean? And then I'm also eventually curious for some of your thoughts about how AI can support that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have what we call in our learning experience team. That's the team I oversee. We have LXDs, or our learning designers, and in some places they're called instructional designers. But we really wanted to make a nod to the learning component and who we're really as our audience. So what we have is optimal course components and world-class learning as our title for our suite of documents. And it's a whole host of different pieces that really sets up the framework for how we're able to help our faculty or subject matter experts and my team collaborate through the design process. And so throughout those documents, we really look at the frameworks around three basic learner domains. So there's the cognitive piece, the affective piece, your feelings and belonging, and then the conation piece, which in some places is called grit. So, what allows students to have that agency and have that ability to know they can do something more, or can conquer this, course. Or on the flip side, that they've been told all their lives that you're not good at math or you're not good at writing, and that affects conation as well. So all of the tenets are really thought through in terms of those certain domains and how we're able to not only think through the content that way, but then the experiences and connections to content that we have through that. So in that, we embed, again, the neuroconnected, or the brain works, how the brain works is really thinking through frameworks of desirable difficulties, interleaving content, so not linear and blocked. And so it kind of ebbs and flows throughout different ways content can be presented, forced retrieval, good old testing in some cases. Generative learning. So in this case is, scaffolding with appropriate challenge is really important, but building that foundation, and novelty. So being able to really think through how this new information, how the brain learns, and how it can store it into long-term memory is something that everything around what we do and how we help faculty put courses together is based on those things.
I think everything that you said is, of course, well-known theory, but so hard to put into practice. It's hard to put into practice even when you're sitting there in front of a student and are able to support them. I'm sure it's even harder when it's online. Specifically, that conation piece, how do you think about that in the online space? If you have a student that is not feeling like they're going to be able to do it, maybe because they are one of these Anders, and there's all this other stuff going on and it just feels a little bit too hard, how are you able to support that student to get through your program?
That goes way beyond our courses themselves. And that includes, everything that the university has around. So all of the support mechanisms. And in fact, a lot of times we see that's the friction for students is the courses are sometimes the most straightforward. And that's necessarily easy. We don't, the rigor has to be there and the way that we're helping students learn has to be there. But the ability to have it be very straightforward. So getting to course, yes, that makes sense. Moving through modules or weeks, yes, that makes sense. Sometimes what doesn't make sense to students is, how do I navigate financial aid? How do I get to the platform to begin with? How do I connect with advisors? How do I connect with peers? And how do I connect with faculty? So that conation piece is really linked in a lot of ways to the affective piece, and understanding that there needs to be those connections, not just with content, but with peers, faculty, and any other support systems that's in the university. So being able to embed where those supports may be needed. So we have something called the Commons, which is peer-to-peer networking. But of course, then there's always, somebody from the library could pop in there if they see need. The faculty is involved in the Commons, and then financial aid advisors. So as things are just talked about, maybe with affinity groups, if people notice that students are struggling in certain ways, there's a way to actually alert those folks that, hey, so-and-so might need some help. But that's where I really think, as far as conation goes, and just giving the students the ability to understand they have the power to have their own agency. We get a lot of faculty through different schools, and we had this happening some too from our own messaging, where it's like, hey, we see you're failing these 2 courses, and if you fail one more course, you're going to be dropped. That sort of messaging actually has instead of saying like early warning and early signals, that sort of messaging really has the negative effect, where they're just like, well, I knew it. I didn't have time for this. It wasn't flexible enough. I've got to work, and I'm going to, probably get tossed out of school here. So we had a whole campaign around, what does our messaging look like, and what is that telling the student? So flipping that, maybe somebody does have 2 Fs, but how about just checking in? Hey, how are you doing? That's it. And so just turning the corner in terms of, this is how you're going to fail. this is how we as the university care about you and are checking in on you. And here are how some of your peers have been successful, navigating difficult courses. So being able to really uplift students and the messaging that means so much, especially if there's not a face necessarily behind it, but it's just it's a text or it's an email. That is something that we've really worked on and have seen a lot of success recently.
I like that. I think it's so interesting the way that you're using those principles of neuroscience and cognitive learning principles to actually meet all three of those areas. When we think about advancements in technology, and when you start thinking about being able to meet students where they are and make sure that what you're building works for how they're learning across all three domains, where do you see the biggest opportunity, especially with new technologies like generative AI?
As far as assessing learning?
As far as the cognitive, affective, and I am blanking on the third.
Conation.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a new word for me. I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah.
Across those three, where do you think that technology can step in and can help you the most?
I think, honestly, it can help in all three almost as equally. It just depends on how, it's accepted and where those opportunities can be, sort of planted into other opportunities. So for the cognitive piece, I think in the courses themselves and helping to learn, there's a lot in terms of generative AI for quizzes. There's a lot in terms of generative AI for tutoring and being able to give personalized help. And as I mentioned a little bit ago, is the whole idea that students being able to sort of choose their own adventure, the ways in which content can be presented and much more easily than, old school studio and effects that way. What can be generated by AI now is pretty incredible, as we all know. So being able to have the less time to do more different types of engaging activities in the content of the course, I think really can help the cognitive domain, and it's going to meet more learners in different ways. From the affective domain, then, being able to really embed support systems. Again, getting students in touch with the right people at the right time. And when students need it, and if they need us to stay out of their way, they're rock stars, then, we know that as well. And I think generative AI can help us as support folks. So not, in faculty, yes, financial aid again, any of the pieces that are helping to map degrees. There's so many ways that connection piece can be made much more easily. So student needs help at 2 a.m. Oftentimes, there's not going to be a live person there to help. Sometimes there are. But then, and sometimes students don't want to, ask their professor or ask an advisor and sound like, oh, I don't know, maybe I'm dumb. Maybe I don't belong here, that imposter syndrome. So having the ability to ask an AI tutor a quick question and get immediate feedback, I think really helps with that connection and belonging piece. Again, the commons. So just connecting students with each other. We also have a program going on called our Peer Navigators. By the way, our mascot is a peregrine falcon called the Navigators. So we are looking at that as well. And just connecting people, this is the human element. It can work through AI, but really being able to connect real people with real people, and have the peers help the students where they might have questions around, again, navigating their degree path, helping, really understanding the English challenges or writing challenges or where to go for other helps or a library. So those pieces can be very helpful too. And just connecting each other in ways that, the back end or the AI can put students together and for contact. And then for conation, I think really, again, just that the agency is so important. So if a student can make his or her own decisions and a student can move forward in his or her own way, it really can help the ability for them to say, okay, I can do this and I will be able to do it. So AI, I think, can help really in those terms. Again, getting questions answered very quickly and being able to help students connect those dots. And generative AI is really good at that.
Mm-hmm. I'm really interested in what you said about some of the cognitive areas too, especially AI for more course design and being able to create things really quickly that can be really interesting and engaging. Are you finding that when you use AI to help create those courses, they end up building courses that are better for students in any way, in the sense that AI can make things more interactive, whereas if a professor is just giving a lecture, then they have to be speaking into the camera the whole time? Or on the flip side, do you find that it is actually harming the students? Do you find that their engagement is going down because it's a chatbot or something like that? What have you been noticing in that realm so far?
Yeah, so where we come from with the learning experience team, we did do a pilot using AI to help generate content from the faculty perspective, and then the faculty reviewers came in and said, yes, this works, or no, it doesn't. We have a lot of courses that are up for revision, or that we want to keep them fresh. I mean, we hope to have our courses refreshed every 2 to 3 years. We've got close to 5,000 courses, so being able to do that with a limited resource of human capability is one of the reasons that we started looking at how can AI help get the content out more quickly. It can even help with things like what needs to be revised and how does it, how can it fit in? We've been using learning experience, and my team have been using in our creative services AI for quite a while in terms of just being able to build up those interactives. So, game playing, roles, scenarios, and problem-based learning that's in a much more interactive space, which again, used to take people weeks to put some of these things together. And so I think we know, and a lot of our faculty get that, interactive content with their voice included and not just lecturing is the way to go. I mean, we've known this for years. It's not necessarily that everybody does it, but we know that lecturing is not the most captivating or engaging way to explore content. I mean, even the most recognized lecturers like Eric Mazur, who was lecturer of the year at Harvard University several years back. He actually, I know this is a bit of an aside, but he actually put, the wired caps on his students to measure brain activity. He found, award-winning lecturer, that while he was lecturing, his students had brain waves that were about as equal to sleeping or watching TV. So very, very passive, right? So we have to keep in mind that even the best lecturers are not going to keep, the students engaged from a learning perspective and how our brains work for too long. So we've known this for a while. It doesn't necessarily mean we're all doing it or doing it well, but being able to take that content and again, adapt it to ways that the students want to explore it. I love the idea of, scenario-based learning. So here's a context, here's a scenario, you choose A or B. What happens? And then it takes you down another path of all these pieces, and the students constantly having to make decisions, drawing in course content, being able to think through, and a low stakes in terms of, anxiety producing. It's not a high stakes test. It's just taking you through and being able to practice. We also know that learning through making mistakes is one of the best ways to learn. It's puts it into long-term memory so much more effectively than memorization. Take a quiz, forget it, and move on. So our creative services team has been dabbling with AI for quite some time and making some really cool interactives. The next step that I see is really being able to up our capabilities in learning experience to revise more courses using AI, and then faculty reviewing it, of course, for accuracy. And that should be able to up the numbers. We have not gotten there yet, so just full transparency. So we haven't been able to test the theory. And as far as, harming students, I personally don't have any of those data that say one way or the other that the chatbots in courses and, do some of the tutors, because it is sort of in small pilots right now. We don't have the data correlation to say whether it's doing one thing or another. We have anecdotal from students that they love being able to ask a chatbot, anytime during the day to help them find an answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like the phase of this technology that we're at right now is in the experimenting phase. We'll gather all this data, and then it's up to us to kind of review it and decide where to go next. I think that makes a lot of sense. So you're thinking the two main things from what I heard from you there are, one, building up those interactives, making that learning experience more robust through the scenarios and things like that. And then also being able to revise and keep your course catalog up to date more easily.
Yeah.
When you think about the interactive part, how is that going so far? You said you had some student anecdotal data, what are they really resonating with? And what would you recommend to others to try too?
Yeah, so the anecdotal data is really around the chatbots. We know that from students, what really matters most from them is, from what we've heard, is we haven't heard a whole lot around the interactives, though we know that keeping students engaged, and we see from some of the retention pieces that, if the students are engaged, they are more apt to persist through the different courses. In terms of, really how the design influences their perspectives, we're just now starting to really ask questions around the design of the course in terms of, was this interactive helpful? How could, the design of the course be different? So leaving it a little more open-ended and then just plugging those in at certain points so they're not overwhelmed by surveys and evaluations. But those really have yet to be fleshed out.
Yeah, that makes sense. If budget and engineering were not a restriction at
Sure.
all, and you could create whatever you wanted to and do whatever you would, what AI-powered product or feature would you put into a course?
Oh man, there are so many right now that I've lost track of all the different things that are happening. I got really intrigued by the fact that a full-length movie has recently been produced by AI, and I would love to know which AI bots or which AI platforms were used. I'm sure you could dig and find it out. They were talking about, a full-length feature animated being done in 9 months using generative AI, and when, others take years.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that's right for the, necessarily the artists and the actors and all those pieces. There's a lot of tenuous things happening right now as far as how is AI displacing people, and I certainly think that that's one of those. But to be able to think through a production time frame and how to get current information, more engaging information out to students more regularly, I think that's something that we need to look into very closely. Certainly things, the animated parts for the animated platforms for generative AI are the ones that you would lean on for that, and they're too many for me to honestly be able to stay on top of. So that's kind of a non-answer, but that's where I am.
I wonder if you were able to make all of any lecture snippets, any videos, all animated and brightly colored. I wonder what it would do to all those brainwaves that the professor at Harvard was measuring.
Yeah, fair. And it might just completely mix all the signals to a point that it's doesn't work at all. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, how do we leverage what we know about the brain, and then how do we leverage what's possible in a way that is somewhat of a middle ground, so it's not so overwhelming and so flashy that the content itself is lost.
Yeah. Do you feel like any of these new technologies are enabling your ability as a university to scale any further, or as you're scaling to be able to scale better? Is it opening up any of those conversations?
Conversations are definitely taking place, and yeah, scalability, I mean, I think is such the name of the game. Again, going back to my own team, we're a finite number of people who can work on courses. Add to it, that AI assistant or that, composer of whether it's content or engagements or any of the or quizzes, different types of assessments. So being able to have that, AI as a partner, and I know that's talked about quite a bit in the workspace, is something that I think is hugely valuable and allows for scalability. The ability for, say, enrollment or advising to have an AI component or a tutor that can also help those students, or at least point students in the right direction and not have to wait on a human who's, helping several hundred other students potentially. I think that's something that absolutely can work to people's benefits for scalability.
Looking 5 years down the road, if you are looking back and you think, wow, we use this new technology well, it worked for us, we made the right bets at the right times and it worked, what would it look like? What measurements would you be looking at to see if you were able to kind of stay on top of it?
Yeah, well, one, scalability, as you mentioned, that's huge. So the amount that we can add to the catalog in terms of updating and keeping content fresh, keeping students' attention. I mean, if students lose attention, then we've lost half of the battle there already. Being able to support students at the right time in the right spot with the right kind of support. So whether it's mental health, whether it's tutoring, whether it's just a question on financial aid, whether it's textbooks or library, I think the ability to interweave all of these pieces and have it look very seamless to the students is if we can get to that place, I could see, retention just going through the roof. And so I think a lot of, again, those friction points for students, they're in a course. How do I get to my financial aid advisor? So what if, everything was just this one piece, that's embedded? You have a course, I can't find my book. The right supports are going to come in immediately. They might be at the library or in our virtual library, and they've got a question about a course, quiz that could be pulled out. And it's like, oh, hey, I see you have a question about this quiz. It's in this course. You're in the library section right now, but being able to put them all together and have it just be one centralized version with all of these different facets, I think that would be amazing. And I don't think we're too far away from that, but I have to imagine that if we just get rid of those friction points, and a lot of time the friction points seem like no-brainers, like who to ask for what question and when, I think that would be a game changer.
That makes so much sense. I'm thinking about what you said at the beginning around how sometimes the courses are not the sticking points. It's everything else. I mean, by the time you enroll, I'm sure most of your students know they're going to be taking classes. That's kind of the expectation. It's all of the other things that come in that can be really hard, that are probably some of the very big barriers. And I think that would be very cool if AI could help out with all of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And what about for the learner themselves? If you are able to implement AI in the cognitive realm really effectively, what do you think that your learners will be able to get out of your courses that are maybe a little bit harder to get out of today?
I think a lot of what we could do better is really connecting, especially with gen ed and humanities. Although my background's English, I have a solid love for the liberal arts and humanities. Is help with all of the chatter and the rhetoric around, is college worth it? Or in some cases, just school in general is worth it. And being able to connect what the student wants to do after school, whether they're already working, do they want to, get a promotion? Do they want to go into something completely different? And implement that knowledge ahead of time. So imagine if a student could fill out some form or talk to an AI bot and say, what do you want to do? Kind of what do you want to do with your life? And why are you here at college? And what do you want? What do you foresee happening next? And a student could have a conversation around, where am I trying to go? What do I want to learn? And how do I want to make an impact? And if something could, have a program around that and say, yeah, this is what you need to, these are the courses you need to take. This is the degree or credentials you'll get out of it. And here's how it's going to connect to X, Y, and Z employers down the line. Could you imagine having that all up front and having the students understand where their pathway is going? And then all of a sudden, English might make a whole lot more sense to an engineering student. Or, history might make a whole lot more sense to somebody who's going into cybersecurity. Being able to take those personalized elements and make those connections through the content for each individual student. And I think that would be cool.
Yeah, it's almost like instead of having 50 tracks to get 50 different degrees, it would almost feel like if you have 10,000 students, you have 10,000 different tracks. I'm sure they would end up at the same degrees. They would take a lot of the same courses, but the feel might be entirely different from one student to the next.
Yeah. And then cognitively, being able to then retain that information because it makes so much more of a difference for you. And that's where those three domains really have to work together. So that affective component is really influencing how and why the students want to learn something, because now it matters. Now it's more meaningful at a personal level. So all of a sudden the content's going to stick a lot more.
Yeah. And I'm excited for you to solve when we do this is as people are getting more and more individualized learning pathways and being able to then still be able to relate to their peer students as well as they can when they're all going through the same path. I know if you're on a discussion board, 20 of you are answering the same question. I don't love a discussion board, but at least you're all talking about the same thing. If you're all talking about different things, it's going to be a new problem to solve next. Then how do we make sure that students are still knowing that they have peers learning the same thing that they are?
Yeah. And that's, I think we see every day in just the world events and our own country's events that, human connection is important. I mean, if we get too far removed on social media, we get too far removed from the day-to-day interactions, we're social creatures. So if we are not able to interact with each other, I mean, a lot of bad things can happen. And so being able to make that connection at the human level, while all this technology is making learning and less friction and all the things, especially within higher education, that piece cannot be left behind. I mean, so I think we really need to pay attention to how we make those connections. So even if it is something like a discussion board where everybody's talking about the same thing with different, perspectives, and then they can go off with their AI buddy and, help learn content in very personalized way. I still think there's that importance of, being able to be humble if you disagree, being able to draw on facts if you agree or disagree. And then that connection, even again, as simple as a discussion board, having that same point of connection and really interacting and understanding that there's human beings surrounding you is probably going to be more important in the future now than ever.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Errin, thank you so much. It was so fun to get to hear about what you're doing at National University, and it makes me really excited to kind of follow along the rest of the journey.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
No problem. If anyone else wants to learn more about the work you're doing, is there anywhere that they can go to learn about it?
Yeah, just go to nu.edu. And if you want to talk more about it with me personally, just email me at eheyman, Heyman, at nu.edu. I'm always excited to talk about stuff like this.
Perfect. Well, Errin, thank you so much.